The sun was setting slowly over the hills of Asheville, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold that danced between the towers of the historic churches. Ethan Mitchell observed the landscape from the window of his newly rented apartment, an old townhouse on Main Street. At 32 years old, he had decided to leave the hustle and bustle of New York City to take a position as a literature professor at the University of North Carolina, Asheville. The change was radical, but necessary after the traumatic breakup with Sarah, his fiancée of 5 years. New beginning, new story, he murmured to himself while organizing books on the solid wood bookshelf that occupied almost the entire wall of the living room. Among the volumes of Hemingway and Faulkner, he found a small, red-covered notebook that he didn't recognize. Intrigued, he opened it and found delicate, feminine handwriting. "Secrets I've Never Told," read the first page. Ethan frowned. The notebook must have belonged to the former resident of the apartment. He flipped through a few pages, hesitant. He knew he shouldn't read something so personal, but curiosity spoke louder. The notebook contained a list of 7 items, all with enigmatic titles, followed by intimate reflections. The sound of the doorbell interrupted his reading. Quickly, Ethan tucked the notebook among his books and went to answer. It was Mrs. Thompson, the building's landlady, a lady in her 70s, with carefully arranged white hair and bright, penetrating eyes. "Good afternoon, Professor. I came to see if everything is in order with the apartment," she said with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Thompson. Everything is perfect, thank you. I'm just finishing organizing my books." The lady's eyes scanned the bookshelf behind Ethan. "I see you like literature. My niece is also passionate about books. She left some belongings here when she moved in a hurry. I need to remember to ask if she misses anything." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "Your niece lived here before?" "Yes, Olivia. She's a teacher too. Teaches history at the state school. She lived here for almost 2 years, but had to move to take care of her mother in Charlotte." Mrs. Thompson sighed. "Sad thing. My sister had a serious health problem." Ethan nodded, understanding, while his mind worked quickly. Should he mention the notebook? For some reason he couldn't explain. He decided not to. Not yet. "If you find anything that might belong to her, let me know," continued Mrs. Thompson. "Oh, before I forget, there's a faculty get-together at the university tomorrow night. I thought you should know since you're new in town." "Thank you for letting me know, Mrs. Thompson. I'll go. It'll be a good opportunity to meet my colleagues." After the landlady said goodbye, Ethan returned to the bookshelf and picked up the red notebook again. Now he knew who it belonged to. Olivia, Mrs. Thompson's niece, a history teacher. For some reason, the image of a dark-haired woman with deep eyes, surrounded by old books, formed in his mind. The next morning, Ethan woke up determined to return the notebook. It was the right thing to do. He would ask Mrs. Thompson for Olivia's contact and send the object by mail. However, as he passed by the bookshelf on his way to the kitchen, his eyes fell on the red cover and curiosity dominated him again. He picked up the notebook and, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, allowed himself to read the first secret. Secret 1, "The Power of the Lingering Gaze," was written in neat letters. "I will never tell a man how I feel when he holds my gaze for longer than socially acceptable, how my entire body responds when I feel that he is truly seeing me, not just looking. It's a kind of silent recognition that says, I see you completely. Today, Edward passed by me at college and barely waved. 7 years together, and he never really saw me." Ethan felt a pang of guilt, but also a growing curiosity about who this woman was and who Edward might be. He continued flipping through the notebook and found more entries, each describing a different secret, reflections on relationships, intimacy, and small gestures that Olivia valued, but had never openly expressed. The faculty get-together at The university would take place that night, in the historic mansion that housed the rector's office. Ethan got ready carefully, choosing a dark blue shirt that accentuated his light eyes, inherited from his Portuguese grandparents. He arrived early at the event, still uncomfortable with the idea of initiating conversations with strangers. He was approached by the rector, a jovial, middle-aged man named Robert, who made a point of introducing him to various colleagues. "And this is Professor Emily Parker, from the anthropology department," said Robert, indicating an elegant woman of about 35 years old, with curly hair tied in an unpretentious bun. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Professor Ethan," said Emily, extending her hand with a warm smile. "I've heard very good things about your work with contemporary literature." Ethan returned the greeting, holding Emily's gaze for a few seconds longer than usual, remembering the first secret of the red notebook. He noticed how her eyes, a deep brown, seemed to light up, and how her smile widened almost imperceptibly. The conversation flowed naturally, and Ethan discovered that Emily was also new to the city, having transferred from Boston just 6 months ago. They shared experiences about adapting to life in a small historic city, laughed about misunderstandings with the southern accent, and discovered a common taste for Iranian cinema. "Have you visited the Blue Ridge Cafe yet? It's near Pack Square, and has the best cheese biscuits in town," suggested Emily, when the conversation reached the topic of local cuisine. "I haven't had the pleasure yet," replied Ethan. "Actually, I'm still discovering the corners of the city." "Well, if you want an improvised tour guide, I'm at your disposal," she offered, picking up a glass of wine from a passing tray. "I can show you places that aren't in the official guides." Ethan smiled, genuinely interested. "I accept the invitation. How about tomorrow after classes?" As they were arranging the details, Ethan noticed a woman standing near the entrance of the hall, observing the party with a distant expression. She had long black hair loose over her shoulders and wore a simple yet elegant emerald green dress. For some inexplicable reason, Ethan felt a chill in his stomach. "Who is that woman near the entrance?" he asked Emily, trying to sound casual. Emily followed his gaze. "Oh, that's Olivia Reed. She teaches history at the state school, but attends many university events because she's doing her PhD in American history. She's very intelligent, but a bit reserved." She paused, looking curiously at Ethan. "Why? Do you know her?" No. I just thought I might know her from somewhere," replied Ethan, feeling his heart race. Olivia Reed, the owner of the red notebook. The woman whose secrets he had begun to unravel was there, a few meters away, flesh and blood, much more intense and real than the image he had formed in his mind. "Would you like me to introduce you to her?" offered Emily, already moving in Olivia's direction. Before Ethan could respond, Emily was already waving to the other woman, calling her to join them. Ethan felt his palms sweat as he watched Olivia approach. How would he explain having read her most intimate diary? How would he look into this woman's eyes knowing the secret she had never told anyone? Olivia approached with a reserved smile, and Ethan felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Her eyes were such a deep brown they almost seemed black, and there was something in them, an intensity, a wisdom, that left him momentarily speechless. "Olivia, this is Professor Ethan Mitchell, the new contemporary literature professor," Emily introduced. "Ethan, this is Olivia Reed, brilliant history teacher and doctoral candidate." "It's a pleasure to meet you," said Ethan, extending his hand and trying to control the tremor in his voice. When Olivia's fingers touched his in a firm handshake, Ethan had the strange sensation that he was facing a mystery he was destined to unravel, and at that moment, silently, he made a promise to himself. He would return the Book of Secrets to its rightful owner. But first, perhaps, he would learn the secret language that women like Olivia never spoke aloud. The Blue Ridge Cafe was exactly as Emily had described. cozy, with exposed stone walls, paintings by local artists, and an irresistible aroma of freshly roasted coffee and southern delicacies. Ethan arrived a few minutes before the agreed time and chose a table at the back, from where he could observe the door. His thoughts, however, were not on the meeting with Emily, but on the brief conversation he had with Olivia the night before. After the initial introductions, Olivia had casually mentioned that she was Mrs. Thompson's niece, and Ethan had almost choked on his wine. "So you lived in my current apartment," he had said, trying to sound casual. "Yes, that apartment on Main Street," she confirmed with a nostalgic smile. "It has a beautiful view of the sunset, doesn't it? I loved staying by the window watching the colors change over the church steeples." "It really is magical," Ethan agreed. "I feel like I'm living inside a Thomas Kinkade painting." Olivia's eyes sparkled with recognition. "You know Kinkade? His series of Asheville landscapes is my favorite. There's a sense of suspension in time that perfectly captures the essence of this city." The conversation flowed naturally to art and literature, and Ethan discovered that Olivia was a passionate connoisseur of both. They talked about Hemingway, Emily Dickinson, and when they got to Faulkner, Olivia quoted from memory a passage from The Sound and the Fury that was exactly the one Ethan used to open his course on stream of consciousness narratives. With each moment of the conversation, Ethan felt more fascinated and more guilty. His eyes occasionally fell on the bag he had brought with him, where he had kept the red notebook with the intention of returning it. But the right moment never seemed to come, and when Emily suggested they continue the conversation another time because it was getting late, Ethan felt both relief and disappointment. Now, waiting for Emily at the Blue Ridge Cafe, he took the notebook out of his bag and opened it to the second entry. "Secret 2. The Value of Unintentional Touch," said the title. "I will never admit how my entire body becomes aware when a man I'm interested in touches me casually. A brush of fingers as he passes me a glass. A light touch on the arm during an animated conversation. These seemingly accidental moments say much more than rehearsed words. With Edward, these touches had become mechanical, predictable, almost clinical. When was the last time I felt shivers from his touch?" Ethan quickly closed the notebook when he saw Emily entering the cafe. She looked elegant in a casual dress, with her curls framing her face. She smiled when she saw him and approached. "British punctuality, I like that," she joked, sitting across from him. The afternoon with Emily was pleasant. She was intelligent, funny, and easy to talk to. After coffee, they strolled through the historic streets of Asheville, with Emily pointing out architectural curiosities and telling stories about the city that weren't in the tourist books. When the typical fine rain of the region began to fall, they took shelter on the covered porch of an old colonial house turned into a bookstore. As they examined the old books, Ethan's fingers accidentally brushed Emily's as they reached for the same volume. He immediately remembered Olivia's second secret and noticed how Emily seemed to freeze momentarily at the contact, how her breath stopped for a fraction of a second before continuing. "Sorry," Ethan murmured automatically. "No problem," Emily replied with a soft smile, letting her fingers remain close to his for a moment longer than necessary. The outing ended with dinner at a charming restaurant, and when they said goodbye, Emily kissed him on the cheek, leaving her floral perfume to linger with him as he walked back home under the drizzle. Upon arriving at the apartment, Ethan went straight to the bookshelf and picked up the red notebook again. The guilt for invading Olivia's privacy still bothered him, but curiosity was stronger. He turned the page to the third secret. Secret 3. The Magic of Truly Listening, it read. "I will never confess how much it disarms me when a man listens not only to my words, but to the silences between them. When he remembers details I casually mentioned weeks ago. When he pays attention not only to what I say, but how I say it. Edward used to plan his responses while I was still talking, always eager to get to the solution, never really present. in the moment. Ethan reflected on this secret as he prepared for bed. Had he really listened to Emily during the day, or was he so preoccupied with the notebook, with Olivia and her secrets, that he had only pretended interest? The next morning, his first day of class, Ethan entered the room still thoughtful. He introduced himself to the students and explained the dynamics of the course, trying to focus on the present moment, as Olivia's third secret had taught. During his introductory lecture on magical realism in Latin American literature, he noticed a familiar figure discreetly entering the room and sitting in the back row. It was Olivia. His heart raced, but he maintained his composure, continuing the class while consciously avoiding looking too much in her direction. When the class ended and the students began to leave, Olivia remained seated, seemingly absorbed in her notes. Ethan slowly packed his things, waiting for the room to empty. "It was a fascinating class," Olivia said when the last student left, "especially your analysis of the use of nonlinear time in Garcia Marquez." "Thank you," Ethan replied, feeling his face heat up. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I hope you don't mind. I have a particular interest in how literature and history intertwine, especially in the construction of national narratives." "Not at all. It's always good to have interdisciplinary perspectives," said Ethan, trying to sound professional while his heart hammered against his chest. "Actually, I'm glad you came. I have something that I think belongs to you." Olivia tilted her head, curious as Ethan took the red notebook out of his bag. When she saw the object, her face visibly paled. Where did you find that?" she asked with a trembling voice. "It was among the books on the shelf in the apartment," Ethan explained, extending the notebook to her. "I realized it must be yours when Mrs. Thompson mentioned that her niece had lived there before." "And you—" Olivia hesitated, taking the notebook with trembling fingers. "Did you read it?" Ethan considered lying, but something in her eyes, a raw vulnerability, a disarming honesty, made him opt for the truth. "I read the first few pages," he admitted, lowering his gaze. "I sincerely apologize. It was invasive and wrong of me." A heavy silence settled between them. When Ethan finally gathered the courage to look at Olivia, he expected to find anger or indignation. Instead, he saw a complex expression that he couldn't decipher. Perhaps a mixture of embarrassment, resignation, and something else. Something that accelerated his pulse. "Which ones did you read?" she finally asked, her voice surprisingly calm. "The first 3, Ethan confessed. About the gaze, the touch, and knowing how to listen. Olivia nodded slowly, leafing through the notebook. "And what did you think?" The question caught him by surprise. "I found it revealing, profound. It made me think about how often we don't pay attention to important details." "Who is Emily?" Olivia asked abruptly, changing the subject. "It was—" Ethan's turn to be surprised. "A colleague from the anthropology department. How do you know about her?" "I heard you talking at the get-together," Olivia explained with a small smile. "She's clearly interested in you." "We had coffee yesterday," said Ethan, not knowing why he felt the need to explain. "It was pleasant." "Did you use the secrets with her?" The question was direct, without accusation, just genuine curiosity. Ethan felt his face burn. "Not intentionally, maybe a little. The one about the gaze and the one about touch." To his surprise, Olivia laughed. It was a crystalline, genuine sound that lit up her face in a way Ethan found absolutely charming. "Well, did it work?" she asked, still smiling. "I think so," Ethan admitted, relaxing a bit. "But I felt like an imposter, using information I shouldn't have." Olivia looked at the notebook in her hands, seeming to make a decision. "I have a proposal for you, Professor Ethan. You read 3 of my secrets without permission. As compensation, How about helping me with my doctoral research? I'm studying the intersections between literature and historical memory in the construction of American identity. Seems fair, Ethan immediately agreed, intrigued by the proposal and the woman in front of him. When can we start? How about tonight? I know an excellent restaurant on Market Street. We can discuss the details there. Ethan nodded, trying not to appear too eager. Perfect. I'll meet you at 8. As he watched Olivia leave the room, Ethan realized he was smiling. The guilt for intruding on her privacy still existed, but it was being replaced by a genuine curiosity about who Olivia Reed really was, beyond the secrets written in her notebook. The hours until dinner dragged on. Ethan tried to focus on preparing for his next classes, but his mind kept going back to Olivia and her mysterious notebook. What would the other 4 secrets be? And why had she reacted so calmly to knowing that he had read her most intimate notes? The restaurant Olivia had suggested was a renovated colonial house with low lighting and soft ambient music. When Ethan arrived, she was already there, sitting at a table in the back, wearing a dark blue silk blouse that accentuated her olive skin tone. When she saw him, she smiled and indicated the chair across from her. Punctuality is a rare virtue, she commented as he sat down. One we share, apparently, Ethan replied, noting that she had arrived even earlier. The conversation flowed naturally as they savored typical Southern dishes and a surprisingly good local wine. They discussed Olivia's thesis, Ethan's classes, and discovered a shared passion for Wes Anderson films and Toni Morrison books. So, you and Edward were together for 7 years? Ethan asked at one point, remembering what he had read in the Yar notebook. Olivia seemed momentarily surprised by the mention of her ex-boyfriend, but quickly composed herself. Yes, from college until last year. He is a talented architect, but our paths were growing apart. What happened? Ethan regretted the question as soon as he asked it. Sorry, you don't have to answer. I'm being invasive again. No, it's okay, said Olivia, taking a sip of wine. It was a peaceful separation, actually. We realized we were together more out of habit than love. He wanted a life in Charlotte, big projects, important parties. I preferred the tranquility of smaller cities, contact with living history. When my mother fell ill, it was the push we needed to admit that we wanted different things. I'm sorry about your mother, Ethan said sincerely. Mrs. Thompson mentioned that you moved to take care of her. Yes, she had a serious heart problem, Olivia explained, and Ethan noticed a hesitation in her voice. She's better now, but it was a difficult period. There was a brief silence, and Ethan found himself reflecting on the 3rd secret, truly listening. There was something in Olivia's tone of voice, in the way she looked away when talking about her mother, that suggested a more complex story than she was telling. And you? She asked, clearly wanting to change the subject. What brought a New Yorker to Asheville? A similar story, actually, Ethan admitted. A relationship that ended, the need for a new beginning. My ex-fiancé and I had been together for 5 years when I discovered she was cheating on me with my best friend. That's terrible, said Olivia, her expression softening with genuine compassion. How did you find out? In the most cliché way possible, Ethan laughed without humor. I came home early and found them together. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself, but realizing that I wasn't as devastated as I should have been. It was as if, deep down, I already knew that something was wrong, that we weren't the same as before. Olivia reached out across the table and lightly touched Ethan's hand. It was a simple gesture, but he felt an electric current run through his body, instantly remembering the 2nd secret from the notebook. Sometimes we need a painful awakening to move forward, she said softly. When their gazes met, Ethan felt a connection that went beyond words. It was as if both recognized in the other the scars of imperfect loves and the courage to start over. "Your notebook," Ethan said hesitantly. "The 7 secrets. Did they come from that experience? From your relationship with Edward?" Olivia withdrew her hand and picked up her wineglass, contemplating the question. "Partially. They are observations I've been collecting over the years. Things I've noticed about myself and about the women around me, small gestures, nuances that many men don't notice but that make all the difference." "And the 4th secret?" Ethan couldn't contain the question. "If you don't mind telling me, of course." An enigmatic smile formed on Olivia's lips. "I think you'll have to find out for yourself, Professor." Ethan felt a shiver of anticipation. "How could I do that without reading your notebook?" "Observe. Pay attention. Use what you've already learned," she replied, her eyes shining with a silent challenge. "Besides, we have an agreement, remember? You help me with my research and well, maybe I'll teach you more than just history." The implicit promise in her words made Ethan's heart race. When dessert arrived, a delicious peach cobbler with vanilla ice cream, they had already outlined a plan for the study sessions. They would meet twice a week at the university library to discuss the intersections between literature and history. At the end of the night, when they left the restaurant onto the cobblestone street, the typical mist of the region enveloped the historic houses, giving the city a mysterious and romantic air. "May I walk you home?" Ethan offered. "Actually, I'm staying at my aunt's apartment at the moment," Olivia explained. "It's 2 blocks from here, and you live in my old apartment, so we're practically neighbors." They walked side by side in comfortable silence, their arms occasionally touching as they avoided the irregular stones on the path. When they reached Mrs. Thompson's building, they stopped under the yellow light of an old lamppost. "It was a pleasant evening," said Olivia, her face partially shadowed. "Very pleasant," Ethan agreed. "I'm looking forward to our first research session." Olivia nodded, seeming momentarily hesitant. Then, in a fluid movement, she approached and lightly kissed Ethan on the cheek, her lips lingering a second longer than would be conventional. "Until Thursday, Professor," she whispered, pulling away. "And don't forget, the 4th secret is waiting to be discovered." As Ethan watched her enter the building, he touched the cheek where her lips had been. He had the clear impression that he had just embarked on a journey much more fascinating than any literary adventure he had ever analyzed in his classes. Thursday morning arrived with a fine rain that covered Asheville with a silver veil. Ethan woke up early, restless with anticipation of meeting Olivia at the library. The 3 days since dinner had been filled with classes, preparation of teaching, materials, and occasional conversations with Emily in the university corridors. The anthropologist remained friendly and clearly interested, but Ethan realized that his thoughts were increasingly dominated by the mysterious history teacher and her unrevealed secrets. As he prepared to leave, his phone rang. It was Mrs. Thompson. "Good morning, Professor. I'm afraid I have some not very good news. Olivia asked me to let you know that she had to go to Charlotte in a hurry. Her mother had a relapse and was hospitalized again." "I'm sorry to hear that," said Ethan, feeling a pang of disappointment mixed with concern. "I hope everything will be okay. Did she say when she'll be back?" "Maybe over the weekend if the situation stabilizes. She apologized for canceling your commitment at the library." After hanging up, Ethan sat in the armchair near the window, watching the rain. He felt strangely empty, as if a day that hadn't even begun had already lost its purpose. It was at that moment that he noticed something in the corner of the bookshelf, a white envelope partially hidden among the books. He approached and picked it up. His name was written on the front, in the same elegant handwriting as the red notebook. He carefully opened it and found a sheet of paper and a small key. "Dear Ethan," the letter said, "if you're reading this, Mrs. Thompson has probably already informed you about my sudden trip. I apologize for the inconvenience. to make up for the absence. I left something for you. The key opens the basement storage closet, where I kept some boxes when I moved. On the third shelf to the right, there's a box with books that might be useful for your research. Feel free to consult them. See you soon, Olivia. Intrigued, Ethan took the key and went down to the building's basement. It was a spacious and surprisingly well-organized area, with numbered and labeled shelves. He easily found the box mentioned by Olivia, a cardboard box with literature and history written on the side. Inside, as promised, were several books on historiography, literary theory, and cultural memory. But what caught Ethan's attention was a second envelope attached to the inside of the box lid, again with his name on it. Secret 4, The Power of Strategic Distance, said the note inside the envelope. I will never openly tell how temporary absence can intensify desire, how giving space for imagination to work can be more powerful than constant presence. We always believe we need to be constantly available, but there's magic in being momentarily unreachable, in allowing the other to miss us, to think of us when we're not there. Edward never understood this. He confused distance with disinterest, silence with rejection. And you, Ethan, what will you do with this time apart? Ethan smiled, understanding the game. Olivia was deliberately using the fourth secret, creating distance to intensify interest. It was ingenious, and Ethan had to admit, effective. He barely knew her, and already missed her, already longed for her return. With the box of books, he went up to the apartment and began examining the material. They were fascinating works about how literature and history intertwined to form national narratives, exactly the theme of Olivia's research. Ethan realized that she had been extremely generous in sharing these sources, many with detailed notes in the margins. As he flipped through one of the books, The Invention of the South, by a renowned historian, a photograph slipped from the pages. It was an image of Olivia next to an older woman, probably her mother, in front of an old mansion. On the back was written, Magnolia Grove, last summer before the diagnosis. Something in the expression of Olivia's mother captured Ethan's attention. There was a deep sadness in her eyes, even as she smiled, a kind of anticipated knowledge of pain. He carefully tucked the photo back into the book, feeling that he had witnessed something very private. The following days passed slowly. Ethan immersed himself in Olivia's books, taking extensive notes and even beginning to sketch ideas for joint articles they could write. On Sunday night, he received a text message from an unknown number. Back in Asheville. Library tomorrow. 4 p.m.? Oh? Ethan immediately responded with a certainly, followed by, I hope your mother is better. The response came a few minutes later. Stable. Thank you for asking, and thank you for taking care of my books. The next morning, he received an invitation from Emily to have lunch. He accepted, realizing that he had completely neglected his colleague in recent days. Lunch was pleasant, with Emily animatedly telling him about a new field research project she was about to start in the region. And how's your work with Olivia Reed going? She asked casually as they were having coffee. Ethan almost choked. How do you know about that? Emily smiled. Asheville is a small-town, professor. News travels fast. Besides, I saw you two leaving the restaurant together last week. We're working on an interdisciplinary research project, explained Ethan, feeling strangely defensive, about literature and historical memory. Of course, said Emily, her tone slightly skeptical. Just be careful. Olivia has an interesting reputation. What do you mean? Asked Ethan, immediately curious. Emily seemed regretful for having mentioned the subject. Nothing important, just rumors. They say she had a breakdown after ending things with her fiancé and had to take time off from teaching. Others comment that the story about her sick mother is exaggerated to justify some unexpected absences. As I said, just rumors. Ethan felt a pang of indignation on Olivia's behalf. I don't give credit to hallway gossip. Of course, neither. Do I? Emily hastened to agree. Anyway, you seem to be really interested in her. In the research, Ethan corrected automatically, although he knew it wasn't entirely true. Emily smiled understandingly. Well, if you change your mind about us, you know where to find me. The meeting at the library was surprisingly formal. Olivia seemed more reserved, more professional than at dinner. They talked about the books Ethan had studied and outlined, a work plan for the coming weeks. There was no mention of the fourth secret, the red notebook, or the photo Ethan had found. How's your mother? He asked, when they finally had a more private moment between the stacks. Stable, Olivia answered briefly. The doctors are optimistic. That's good. And you, how are you? Olivia looked at him with an expression he couldn't decipher. I'm fine. Thank you for asking. There was an uncomfortable silence, and Ethan felt that something had changed. The connection he had felt during dinner seemed to have retracted. I feel like something's wrong, he finally said, deciding to be direct. Did I do something that bothered you? Olivia sighed, her gaze softening a bit. No, it's not you. It's just that... She looked around, making sure they were really alone. I found some old notes while I was in Charlotte, things I wrote during a difficult period. It made me question whether I should continue with this game we started. The game of secrets? Ethan asked, lowering his voice. She nodded. I realize now that it may have been impulsive of me to share something so personal with someone I just met. I understand, said Ethan, feeling a pang of disappointment. I'll respect your decision, whatever it may be. Olivia studied his face for a moment. Let's continue with the research. It's important work for me, and you have valuable insights. As for the rest, I think we need time. They agreed to meet again on Wednesday, and Ethan watched Olivia leave the library with quick steps, as if she were running away from something or someone. The next few days were confusing for Ethan. On one hand, he was genuinely interested in the academic research with Olivia. On the other, he couldn't stop thinking about the unrevealed secrets of the red notebook and what had caused her sudden change in attitude. On Wednesday, he arrived at the library early and was surprised to find a message from the librarian. Olivia had called canceling the meeting, as she had to return to Charlotte urgently. Worried, Ethan called Mrs. Thompson to see if there was any news. The landlady seemed strangely evasive, only confirming that Olivia had left that morning and didn't know when she would return. That night, Ethan could barely sleep. There was something about the whole situation that didn't fit. Why had Olivia initiated the game of secrets only to retreat so abruptly? What had happened in Charlotte? And why the persistent feeling that there was more to the story of her mother's illness than was being told? On Friday, after his classes, Ethan decided to visit the history department, where Olivia occasionally gave classes as a guest lecturer. He managed to speak with the coordinator, Professor James, a middle-aged gentleman with thick-framed glasses. Ah, yes, Olivia Reed, he said when Ethan mentioned her name. Excellent researcher. A shame what happened. What exactly happened? Ethan asked, trying to sound casual. The professor looked at him curiously. You don't know? I thought you were close, since you're working together on the interdisciplinary project. We are, but she had to travel suddenly and didn't go into details. Professor James looked uncomfortable. Well, it's not really my place to speak, but considering you're collaborating, he sighed. Olivia's mother passed away almost a year ago. Terminal cancer. It was devastating for her, especially because it happened right after the breakup with her fiancé. Ethan felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. But She's been regularly going to Charlotte to take care of her mother. She said she was hospitalized. The professor frowned. That's strange. Unless she has another family member who's sick and she also calls mother? A stepmother, perhaps? Maybe, Ethan murmured, although he knew that wasn't the case. Thank you for your time, Professor. He left the department feeling deeply disturbed. Why would Olivia lie about something so serious? What was really taking her to Charlotte so frequently and urgently? That night, unable to contain his restlessness, Ethan took the key Olivia had given him and went down to the basement again. He examined the box of books more carefully, looking for any clue that might help him understand what was going on. At the bottom of the box, under all the books, he found a spiral notebook different from the red one. This one was black, with the word therapy written on the cover. Ethan hesitated. He had already violated Olivia's privacy once by reading the red notebook. Doing it again would be unforgivable. But what if she was in some kind of trouble? What if she needed help? With a heavy heart, he opened the notebook. The first pages contained notes from therapy sessions, dated from the previous year. Olivia wrote about grieving for her mother, about how she blamed herself for not noticing the symptoms earlier, for having been so absorbed in her own problems with Edward. As he progressed through the notebook, the entries became darker. Olivia described episodes of dissociation, moments when she caught herself talking to her mother as if she were still alive. Dr. Marcus says it's a form of denial, that part of me refuses to accept that she's gone, she wrote in one entry. Today I caught myself buying the medicines she used to take. The pharmacist looked at me with pity, as if he knew. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. Olivia wasn't lying, at least not consciously. She was stuck in a cycle of denial and unprocessed grief that made her relive her mother's illness, genuinely believing that she still needed her care. The most recent entries mentioned improvements, how Olivia was responding well to therapy and medication. But there were also relapses, moments when the illusion came back in full force. Today was a bad day, said the last entry, dated just 2 weeks earlier. I woke up convinced that Mom had called asking me to go to Charlotte. I even packed before. I realized. Dr. Marcus says the stress of the new semester may be contributing to the relapses. I also mentioned Ethan. He thinks I'm rushing, that I'm not ready for a new relationship while I still have these episodes. Maybe he's right. Ethan closed the notebook, feeling devastated and simultaneously illuminated. Now everything made sense. The sudden trips, Mrs. Thompson's reluctance to give details, Olivia's change in behavior. She had probably gotten scared when she realized she was getting close to him, fearing that he would discover her condition. He carefully returned the notebook to the box and went up to his apartment, his mind working frantically. What should he do? Confront Olivia? Pretend he didn't know anything? Distance himself completely? The answer came in the form of a soft knock at his door shortly after 9 o'clock at night. When he opened it, he found Olivia standing there, pale and with red eyes, as if she had been crying. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan stepped aside, allowing her to enter. Olivia walked to the window, looking at the night view of Asheville that she loved so much. "I spoke with Professor James today," she said without turning around. "He mentioned that you were there asking about me." Ethan felt himself blush with shame. "I was worried. You canceled our meeting without explanation. And instead of simply calling me, you decided to investigate," she concluded, finally turning to face him. There was no accusation in her voice, only a deep sadness. "I'm sorry," said Ethan, approaching hesitantly. "I had no right." "No, you didn't," Olivia agreed. Then, after a moment, she added, But I understand why you did it. I haven't exactly been transparent." There was a heavy silence between them. Finally, Ethan took courage to ask, "Your mother?" "Died 11 months and 3 weeks ago," Olivia completed, her voice breaking slightly. "Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed too late. It was quick and terrible." "I'm so sorry," said Ethan, wishing he had better, more meaningful words. "The problem is that part of me refuses to accept it," Olivia continued, running her hand through her hair in a nervous gesture. "I have these episodes where I really believe she's still alive, that she needs me. I'm in treatment, and usually I can control it, but sometimes the illusion is too strong," Ethan completed softly. Olivia looked at him with surprise. "How do you know?" Ethan hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. "I found your therapy notebook in the basement. I know. It was unforgivable. I have no excuses." To his surprise, Olivia just nodded, as if she had expected this. "So now, you know everything. That I'm mentally unstable, that I have hallucinations, that I'm not reliable." "What I know," said Ethan, taking a step towards her, "is that you went through a terrible trauma and are struggling to heal. That doesn't make you unstable or unreliable. It makes you human." Tears began to roll down Olivia's face. "I was going to tell you everything at dinner that night. But then you mentioned your ex-fiancé, how hurt you were, and I couldn't add my problems to yours. And then, in Charlotte, I had another episode, and my therapist suggested that I step back, that it wasn't fair to involve someone else while I was still so fragile." "And the secrets?" Ethan asked gently. "The red notebook?" A small smile appeared on Olivia's face, even through the tears. "Oh, that's real. It was a therapeutic project, actually. Dr. Marcus suggested that I write about positive aspects of relationships, things I valued, so as not to get stuck only in painful memories of the past. So, the 7 secrets are real, yes, things I've observed, that I value, that I believe in, and yes, I deliberately let you find them. When Mrs. Thompson mentioned that my old apartment had been rented to a literature professor, I was curious. I left the notebook knowing that a man who loves books would hardly resist a mysterious diary." "It was manipulative," Ethan observed, "but without rancor." "It was," Olivia admitted, "and then I felt horrible about it. Especially when I realized that you're genuinely a good person who didn't deserve to be involved in my psychological games." Ethan took her hands in his. "And the other 3 secrets? The ones I never read?" Olivia took a deep breath, seeming to make a decision. "The 5th is about vulnerability, about how powerful it is when a man shows his weaknesses, his uncertainties. Edward always tried to appear strong, invulnerable, never admitted to being lost or scared. But there's nothing more intimate than sharing fears. Like you're doing now," Ethan observed. "Yes," she agreed, squeezing his hands lightly. "The 6th is about patience, about how extraordinary it is when someone is willing to wait. For your definition, for your decision, for your moment. Society values speed so much, immediate conquest, that we lose the beauty of slow blossoming." "And the 7th?" Ethan asked, his voice almost a whisper. "The 7th," said Olivia, looking directly into his eyes, "is about forgiveness, about accepting that we all make mistakes, that we all have flaws and scars, about loving not despite the imperfections, but with them, through them." There was a moment of deep silence, only the sound of the light rain that was beginning to fall outside, softly hitting the window. "Olivia," Ethan finally said, "I would very much like to get to know you. The real you, with all your strengths and fragilities. I'm in no hurry. We can go at your pace. Take one step at a time. Even knowing all this, the episodes, the unresolved grief, the psychological games. Especially knowing all this, he confirmed. I prefer the complex truth to a false simplicity. Olivia took a step forward and gently touched Ethan's face. There's an 8th secret I never wrote in the notebook, she said, her voice just a little louder than the rain. About how it feels to find someone who sees you completely and still decides to stay. That night, there were no passionate kisses or grand promises. Just 2 people sitting by the window of an apartment in Asheville, watching the rain fall on the historic city, sharing stories, fears, and hopes. 2 wounded hearts finding comfort in each other's honesty, in the silent promise of a new beginning based not on the fantasy of perfect love, but on the imperfect and beautiful reality of 2 real people learning to open up again. And when the sun began to rise, painting the sky with the same golden hues that Ethan had observed on his first day in the city, he realized that he had discovered the most valuable secret of all. That true love is not found in manuals or formulas, but in small moments of courage, in whispered confessions, in understanding silences, and in the conscious decision, renewed, each day, to continue revealing oneself, one secret at a time. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Olivia's relationship grew slowly but steadily. They met regularly for their research sessions, but these meetings often evolved into long conversations about life, literature, and their shared experiences. Olivia gradually opened up more about her struggles with grief and her ongoing therapy, while Ethan shared his own insecurities and past wounds. Their colleagues at the university noticed the growing closeness between them, but respected their privacy. Emily, in particular, showed genuine happiness for Ethan, even if tinged with a hint of wistfulness for what might have been. As autumn turned to winter, Olivia's episodes became less frequent, and she found herself relying on Ethan's steady presence during the difficult moments. He never pushed, never demanded, but was always there, a silent support when she needed it most. One snowy evening, as they sat in Ethan's apartment surrounded by books and research papers, Olivia suddenly looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "I think I'm ready," she said softly. "Ready for what?" Ethan asked, putting down his pen. "To let go," she replied. "To stop pretending my mother is still alive. To move forward." Ethan reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "That's incredibly brave of you, Olivia. How can I help?" "Just be here," she said. "Hold my hand as I face this, and maybe come with me to visit her grave. I haven't been able to go since the funeral." Ethan nodded, his eyes full of understanding and compassion. "Of course, whenever you're ready." The next day they drove to Charlotte. The cemetery was quiet, blanketed in fresh snow. Olivia led, the way to her mother's grave, her steps slow but determined. As they stood before the headstone, Olivia began to speak, her voice choked with emotion. "Hi, Mom," she said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to come back. I couldn't face it. But I'm here now, and I brought someone special with me." As Olivia continued to talk, sharing memories and expressing her love and grief, Ethan stood beside her, a steady presence. When she finally fell silent, tears streaming down her face, he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as she cried. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet of the snow-covered cemetery, both Ethan and Olivia felt a shift. It was as if a weight had been lifted, a barrier broken. They had crossed a threshold together, and on the other side lay a future full of possibility. As they drove back to Asheville that evening, the car filled with a comfortable silence, Olivia reached over and took Ethan's hand. "Thank you," she said simply. Ethan smiled, understanding all that those 2 words encompassed. Always, he replied. In the months that followed, their relationship deepened. They collaborated on research papers, explored the hidden corners of Asheville together, and slowly built a life intertwined with books, shared meals, and quiet evenings. They faced challenges, Olivia's occasional relapses, Ethan's moments of self-doubt, but they faced them together, always returning to the honesty and vulnerability that had brought them together. A year after that rainy night when Olivia had shared her truth, they stood once again by the window in Ethan's apartment, now their shared home. The view of Asheville hadn't changed, but they had. "I have something for you," Olivia said, handing Ethan a small, wrapped package. He opened it to find a new notebook, its cover a deep blue. "For our new secrets," Olivia explained. "The ones we'll create together." Ethan smiled, pulling her close. "I love you," he said, the words carrying the weight of all they had been through, all they had overcome. "I love you too," Olivia replied, her eyes shining with tears of joy, as they stood there, embracing in the golden light of another Asheville sunset. Both Ethan and Olivia knew that while their story wasn't perfect, it was real. And in its imperfections, its challenges, and its moments of raw honesty, they had found something far more precious than any fairy tale romance. They had found home in each other,